right. So welcome to I guess July 4th was a couple of days ago. So
Yeah.
we could say this is a celebratory episode just based on that. Of Happy Hour with Heather and Guest, episode number 34. I think it's 34. Um,
Yeah.
if you couldn't tell, I'm visiting my parents in South Carolina, hence my old Freddy Krueger fedora and not my usual nifty fedora that my buddy Johnny K got me. Um, and Heather and I are both wearing the newest version of the Happy Hour with Heather and Guest Butch Cassidy style T-shirt.
Yes.
Heather is Butch Cassidy, and I'm the son. It's reversed, and I'm the Sundance Kid. And of course, we have the Doom Dog I sold, who's a Neapolitan Mastiff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So today it was my choice for bands. So I selected the bands, and you picked the tracks. So we are going to go across the pond again. We're going to kick things off with a group. I think it's pronounced Slowenya. It could be Slowenya, but I'm going to roll with Slowenya. Slowenya. They are from Turku, Finland. And this was one of those bands that I didn't really know much about, but through a spelunking trip on YouTube, I think I listened to one or two of the songs in the YouTube algorithm, and that was enough to hook me. And then I earmarked it. I was like, I need to revisit this at some point. So
Yeah.
now these days, like with A Fistful of Faceful, but specifically with this show, when I hear a band I want to share with other people, I like make a note. I remember Alice Cooper being interviewed once for a documentary called Hired Gun, which is all about session musicians. And he took his daughter to a concert. And it was I don't think it was Miley Cyrus. You know who it was? It was, what's her name? I'm blanking on this. She has blonde hair. Hillary Duff. There we go. He took his daughter to a Hillary Duff concert, and this guy Jason Hook, who later joined Five Finger Death Punch, was one of Hillary Duff's guitarists. So Alice Cooper said, "Wow, that guy, and he didn't look like he belonged in he had like a chain wallet and metal clothes, and didn't look like he should have been on stage with Hillary Duff." And Alice Cooper was like, "Who is that? That guitarist can play. I'm going to make a note. I'm going to keep track of him." And then when Alice Cooper needed a guitarist in his traveling band, he called up Jason Hook. So in this analogy, I'm Alice Cooper, and the bands for the show are the Jason Hook of that analogy. So let's thank you again for letting me tangent. But Slowenya, the first album we're going to listen to, I think is called Somer, Smosomer, came out in 2021. And the two tracks you picked, the first one was, I'm going to guess, Unruhe, Unruhe. What did you think of Unruhe?
All right. So this is Doomgaze, and I love it. It's heavy, but has atmosphere and gazy, dreamlike vocals. I wasn't aware of this band and how awesome that you suggested them. This song epitomizes my music taste and love of music. I'm not wearing a hat, but hat tip to you.
Thank you.
And on a side note, I just got a new car with a sweet sound system, and this was the first album that I played at ear-crushing levels,
Nice.
as it should be.
So, Slowenya, you've passed the test you broke in Heather's car in the new sound system. And,
Yes.
yeah, I mean, I didn't. I obviously I hadn't heard most of their songs, and I didn't remember exactly what they sounded like. I just remembered this was a band that I want to revisit. So once you confirmed that it was Doomgaze, I knew. I was like, oh, okay. Well, then this is going to be right up Heather's alley. Um,
Yeah.
and I felt some. I described it. I said that Unru or Unru, I'm not sure how it's pronounced. I said it was like a lucid fever dream. It reminded me, it doesn't sound anything like Pink Floyd, but it reminded me of the song Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd. Like someone in a coma experiencing some sort of fever dream. Um, and then there's like this strange cascading waterfall up and down the neck of chords. Like it's like the chords all bleed into each other. There's not there's not like a demarcation line. It's sort of like a fluid. It was unique. And then it was sort of like a roller coaster of highs and lows into a melodic element of beauty. So it had all the bells and whistles, but it also had the solid foundation.
Yeah.
So next up, Somer, the title of the album.
Yeah. And I always love when there's a song title that's also the name of the album. I feel like it's listen up. This song is important. So I always like to include them. He sings about the ocean and waves and beautiful friends. The song is incredible. It starts out slower with a great doom repetitive groove, and then midway changes to a different bass line, and then it builds. The vocals are great. They just soar. And the song ends with the ocean stands still with just a note held on the guitar. It almost sounded like it was a radio signal just kind of fading out.
Yeah, this was my favorite track of this album. I mean, we only listened to two songs, but I think I can make that guarantee. Uh, the beginning of it, it sounds like an orchestra sort of syncing up. It was a really cool sort of feel, like all the instruments blending in to create the sound. Um, this one was a little bit more melodic than the previous song, and I liked how there were harmonizing vocals. This one uh, still had a bit of that fever dream feel to it, but not as sort of like a nightmare fever dream. And then I described it as a sonic landscape. And then because it changed here and there, it felt like it was a song in multiple acts. So really cool though. My favorite that we listened to of that album, and that came out in 2021. And then the next album we listened to was Meadow, which came out this year. And the first track off of Meadow that we listened to was Synchronized.
Yes. And you know what I thought of when I listened to this? How awesome it would be if a marching band performed this song. The beginning of the song reminded me of a march, and I like how heavy it gets at the end, almost like industrial music, which I'm also a huge fan of. And it reminded me of marching again. And this would be an excellent song to add to a workout playlist.
Definitely. This one, I said spacey and doomgazy. This one felt a little bit more spacey and doomgazy than the previous album. I think more on the spacey side. And it got me, it got a little side head nod going. Nothing, nothing where I was going to be banging my head like Quiet Riot, but still. This had more of a ground control to Major Tom type feel, like a day, like whereas The first track was more of a comfortably numb, person wrestling through a fever dream. This one was kind of like an astronaut in orbit, just sort of coasting through space, watching the vast, landscape of whatever, or the spacescape or the soundscape, whatever, some kind of scape. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, that was my 2 cents, but I think you summed it up nicely. And then next up was Irrevocable.
Yeah. And did you have a xylophone when you were a kid?
I'm sure I had some some, probably when I was really young, I had one of those like small xylophone with the metal.
Metal, yeah.
Yeah.
The yeah, I had one too. I had and I wanted to get it out and see if I could follow along to this song. That's what the beginning sequence reminded me of. This song has some awesome doomy riffs, and then the drums, it's very powerful. It's got some power. Also has some nice ambient parts. The mixing of the floaty post rock, the ambient, and the doom is really nice, and I really like it.
Yeah, I said that this one, it has the xylophone beginning, and then it sort of emerges into a new wave type. Like I felt that even though this is clearly doom and stoner, like this one felt like new wavy to me for some reason. And I love the fact that I'm making everything into an adverb right now. It's new wavy, um, but with some doom gazy instruments. And then I just wrote more xylophone. I think perhaps, like in the Blue Oyster Cult sketch on Saturday Night Live, I have a fever, and what I need is more cowbell. What I need is more xylophone.
More xylophone. More
Um,
xylophone.
I said that this could be there. There was a book which was made into a movie called Johnny Got His Gun, and it was about a World War I veteran who is he I think there's a bomb that goes off, so he's severely wounded and he loses his hearing, his sight, his limbs, and he just sort of is living in this uh, dream state almost. And then he learns how to communicate with the outside world using SOS. If you've ever seen the music video One by Metallica, that's the black and white. That's the movie. Which interestingly enough, they bought the rights to that movie so that they wouldn't have to pay royalties every time the video played.
Oh,
So
wow.
I thought that was so. Metallica owns the rights to Johnny Got His Gun, but that's so. Whereas the first few songs felt like analogies to songs like "Comfortably Numb" and "Ground Control to Major Tom," or I think that's called "Space Oddity." Um, this was more of like a soundtrack that would be playing to Johnny Got His Gun, uh, where it was sort of like it just matched the fever dream element. I don't know if the fever dream element is something they went for consciously, but that's how I perceived all of these tracks, is to be sort of like that space, you're in a dream, a nightmare, a dream, or in a coma, or you're having a fever. It's all that stuff combined. Um, and then the last track we listened to was Resonate and Relate.
Yeah, and this one has both clean and harsher vocals. They're shaking things up here. It starts out dreamy and shoegazy, then the harsher vocals come in. And again, it gives it an industrial feel. It goes back to clean singing after that and has a pretty great build up at the end. And I just wanted to mention too that I put both these albums, the full albums, I put both of them on our YouTube playlist.
Yeah, so now is the time. I'm glad you mentioned that. Now is the time in the show where I always recommend hitting pause, checking out the playlist that Heather has assembled so you'll understand what we're talking about if you haven't heard these songs already. Um, for Resonate and Relate, I wrote a subdued melodic chord progression, not heavily distorted, and then growling vocals come in and we spelunk into the depths. And I wrote, this would be the part of the movie where the protagonist who's in a coma is undergoing some sort of radical changes, like, possibly going into cardiac arrest, but surviving, like something really, really drastic is happening. And then it sounded almost like a synthesizer that was signaling that there were calm waters ahead and that everything would be okay. So it was almost like we were emerging from that fever dream. So if I were going to write a rock opera about, someone who is sick and gets better, I would probably set it to Slowenya, because that's what it obviously imprinted that on me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm really glad you liked it. I feel like we've been on a great roll since the inception of this version of the show, with just band after band, and really diversified genres within the kind of the doom stoner sludge umbrella.
Yeah, and it's like the bands that we have showcased. Some of them you've brought to my attention, and I hadn't heard them before, and it just seems like all of them that we showcased have just been so good, and I'm definitely paying more attention to them now.
Yeah, well, and vice versa. I mean, there have been bands that you've brought to my attention who now have permanent spots on my playlist, and
Yeah.
I listen to them frequently. So next up, there's a band called Ooze, who are from, and I'm probably going to mispronounce, uh, Vasilkiv, I think, Vasilkiv, Ukraine. So if you get the chance to help out Ooze, because obviously things are not well in Ukraine right now, and they could certainly use your help. You can find them on Bandcamp. I know they have 2 EPs that we listen to, or at least I listen to, Shivers and Cableway. So Shivers. Well, I'll let you. Why don't you? Did you listen to both of them?
Yeah, I listened to both of them, and Cableway I listened to first because that one came out first. I'll just go through both of them if
Sure.
that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. For Cableway, heavy psych with progressive and post rock elements. Besides doom and doom gaze, heavy psych and post rock are some of my favorite genres. So this is mostly instrumental, but it does have some vocals. A couple of songs have vocals. I made sure I followed them on Bandcamp and YouTube because I really like this. And they were able to pack a lot into a 4-song EP. And then with Shivers, that one came out in 2020. There's an addition of the violin, which is really cool. And it also has some keyboard in there. The violin gives it a very soulful quality, and the juxtaposition to the keyboard is very interesting. I noticed the drums change tempo quite often. This is purely instrumental, and the different instruments keep the music interesting and entertaining.
Yeah, I did the reverse of how I listened to Shivers first, and then Cableway second. And Shivers is a 4-song EP that's essentially one giant song. Like, it's 4 songs split up into 4 parts, or 1 song split up into 4 parts. They have different titles, but it's like part 1 title, part 2 title, part 3 part. So and it flows. Each song flows into the next segment. Um, and it was like listening to a symphony orchestra in a way because of the violin and the keyboards, but it still retained a lot of that progressive, like post rock feel to it. So definitely different from the other album. It sounded like they were building on more of the progressive elements. The first album, Cableway, is what had hooked me to them. Again, through a YouTube spelunking, probably when I also discovered Slowenya. Um, and Back End, I remember, was the song I heard, which I think is the third song on the album. This one is a lot more straight up stoner doom, much less of a progressive feel. Um, and yeah, I mean, Back End, like when I heard Back End again, I was like, oh yeah, this is what got me hooked. Uh, so I would recommend definitely checking out Ooze. Um, help them if you can, as well as Stone Jesus, both bands from Ukraine who could definitely uh, use some help with regard to buying their merch and music, and doing what you can during this difficult time. But but if you can, check out Ooze's EPs. They're both great. Um, really dynamite listens, as well as Slowenia. And that'll bring us to our last group, Clay Soldiers, who have a new album dropping on July 16th, so 9 days from today, called Life After Death. Um, and I just got a text from my mother. She's home, so it's perfect timing since we're wrapping up. But why don't you give me your impressions? We listened to a single called Drive It Home.
Yes, and I liked reading how they achieved the Pipe Bomb Radio New York City Artist of the Month in April 2021. I also like reading their fun facts. They're very, very experienced musicians, even though this is their first EP. They describe their music as rock with elements of grunge and stoner. I went to their YouTube channel and I put 3 of their videos on our YouTube playlist. That way you can get, you can get an idea of what they sound like and prepare for the release of Life After Death. I really like the song Drive It Home. I definitely picked up on the grunge elements, and especially towards the end, it had some Chris Cornell vibes.
Yeah, it's interesting because I had read their Bandcamp description first, and they're a relatively new band. It said they formed in London in 2020, so they've only, I mean, whether or not they'd been playing unofficially together before then, but officially they've only been together for 2 years. Um, it says they share common ground in the music they grew up with. Early discussions always seemed to be about our passion for such bands as Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Black Sabbath, and Caius. We love to mix melodic with heavy, combining the deep, energetic melodies of grunge and the heavy grooves of stoner rock. And the first thing I got was the same impression you had. This reminded me of the great grunge bands of the 90s that I grew up with. Um, and then when I read that they were influenced by Soundgarden and Alice in Chains, I was like, oh, well, that clearly makes sense. Um, so I'm really excited to pick up Life After Death when it drops on the 16th, because this is right, right in my wheelhouse. Not only was the nostalgia factor, wrenched up to 11, or ranked or wrenched or whatever verb you want to use. Um, it's great. I say this so much that I feel like it's become cliched, but I really love that there are these new bands tapping into these genres, taking places of bands who aren't putting out music anymore. Um, so rather than revisiting the old hits all the time, I can throw on the new jams and ring in, a celebration with Clay Soldiers and Ooze and Slowenya, and it's just awesome.
Yeah.
So So yeah, so that did it. And I know um, Slowenya from Finland, Ooze from Ukraine, Clay Soldiers from England. We're continuing our sojourn around the world, bringing you these dynamite jams. And next week we'll be off because I will be traveling. But the following week we'll be bringing you episode number 35, which will be Heather's choice of music and my choice of tracks. But as always, this is one of the great treats in life is to be able to wax philosophical with Heather and talk way too long.
And talk about music.
Talk about music.
Yes.
Make references to really obscure movies and facts about life. I mean, this is really
yes. It's a lot of fun, and I just appreciate everyone that listens and definitely takes the time to check out the music that we talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like this is the only platform that I would be tolerated to just be to give 100% of who I am. I don't know if I could do that anywhere else.
I don't think that's true.
Well, thank you for saying that. This is the most enjoyable place where I get to be 100% of myself. I will say that. So, but I do agree. The most important thing is that you out there who's listening to this, go check out and support these bands because they're making really great music that deserves to be heard by the masses. So that would be my go check out our playlist, subscribe on Bandcamp, buy the music and merch of these bands, and crank it to 11. Wrench it to 11. Do something with it to 11. That would be my suggestion. So I think that's going to do it. Did you drop off? Are you still there?
Yeah, unfortunately I didn't hear anything that you said.
Oh,
I lost my signal.
That's okay. I basically I was wondering why you had looked so poker faced.
Because you were like frozen, and I couldn't hear anything you were saying, and I'm like, oh boy.
Gotcha. No, I was saying that you were correct about people supporting the bands and finding the music and getting, discovering the music, listening to the music of these bands is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And then me indulging my eccentric behavior is an important thing, but not the most important thing. And that these bands deserve to be heard by the masses. So,
yeah, definitely.
So we're doing our part. And we won't be around next week, but the following week we'll be back at our usual places to bring you dynamite jams. Heather, it's always a pleasure. And
thank you.
We will see you next week.
Bye.